She single-handedly engineered the groundbreaking algorithm that promised to revolutionize global finance. But when her fiancé, her best friend, and an influential investor secretly conspired to cut her out of their billion-dollar acquisition, she stunned the tech world with a live, devastating reveal that exposed their lies, reclaimed her legacy, and sparked the most talked-about revenge scandal of the decade. I was wearing the dress I had bought for my engagement party the night I decided to ruin 3 people in one elegant, carefully documented stroke. Back when I'd first zipped it up, the dress had felt like a promise. Soft blue satin and fluttery sleeves that made me look like the cheerful, slightly nerdy bride-to-be in a wedding blog. Tonight, it felt like armor. The conference hotel ballroom hummed on the other side of the tall double doors, full of investors, reporters, executives, and the kind of people who use synergy in actual sentences. All of them were here for the big announcement: Apex Capital's acquisition of Heliobank, the hottest financial technology startup of the year. My startup. Their lanyards flashed under the lights as they moved through the foyer, small rivers of wealth and curiosity collecting outside the ballroom. Helio's logo glowed from screens and banners and neat acrylic stands, the rounded sunburst shape I designed in a coffee shop 3 years ago, a little amused with myself for picking something so on the nose. Helio, Ethan had said then. Like the sun, we're shining light into the dark corners of finance. Tonight I planned to show everyone what had been hiding in those shadows. My phone buzzed in my hand. A text from Priya, my attorney, my friend, and the only person who had looked at my wild plan and said, honestly, this might actually work. They're on stage in 10. Stream is live. You ready, Maya? I stared at the message for a second, feeling my heartbeat drum in my throat, then typed back with hands that were oddly steady. More than ready. I adjusted my conference badge so it lay neatly against the satin, the little plastic rectangle that announced me as Maya Ortiz, independent consultant. That title still felt strange, like a new pair of shoes I hadn't quite broken in. On the second line, in smaller font, it said, former CTO Heliobank, because I had insisted on the word former, and the organizer hadn't argued. I stepped into the flow of people and let myself be carried through the doors and into the ballroom. A wave of sound swept over me. Clinking glassware, murmured conversations, the stage crew doing last-minute checks. The stage at the front looked like a shrine, with a giant screen displaying the logos of Apex and Helio side by side, the words strategic acquisition pulsing politely beneath. Lights warmed the space in Helio's brand colors, those golds and soft blues that had once made me feel hopeful and now mostly made my teeth clench. I found a seat near the back, close to the central aisle, where I had a clear line of sight to the stage and the exits. Old habits die hard. Once you've spent years debugging systems, you start mapping contingencies everywhere. On the screen, a highlight reel began to play. Helio engineers, not me, laughing in front of whiteboards, Ethan in a crisp shirt rolling up his sleeves as if he'd just personally stayed up all night pushing code, Lila walking through the office with a tablet, smiling warmly at someone off camera. It was like watching a life I almost remembered but couldn't quite place. There was a shot of the original office, the bare brick space with the tall windows, and I saw the back of my own head for half a second as I walked past a glass wall, blurred and small. At Heliobank, Ethan's voiceover said in that confident, practiced tone, we believed there was a better way to understand financial risk. We built something that could change who gets a chance. I almost snorted. The we in the video didn't include the woman who'd built the first version of the risk engine in a dorm room, hair in a messy bun, fingers cramped from typing. It didn't include the nights I'd slept on the office couch with a hoodie as a blanket, waking up to the sound of the cleaning staff and apologizing for being in their way. It definitely didn't include the part where my so-called partners had quietly shuffled me out of the story, then tried to convince me I should be grateful it wasn't worse. A man took the empty seat next to me, balancing a plate of tiny desserts like he'd won them in a festive battle. You here with Apex or Helio? He asked, friendly, glancing at my badge. I turned my lanyard so he could see. His eyebrows shot up. Oh, he said. Wow, you're that Maya, the original CTO? The original everything, I said lightly. But yes, that's me. I read that profile in Tech North, he said. They made it sound like you just stepped back for personal reasons. His tone suggested he didn't entirely buy it. Nobody who actually worked in tech believed that narrative. People didn't step back from a rocket ship. They were pushed. People step in and out of things all the time, I replied and popped one of his borrowed mini tarts into my mouth before he could protest because if I didn't keep some kind of humor, I was going to combust. Interactions are complicated, you know how it is. He chuckled. Fair enough, I'm Aaron, analyst at Crestline. Nice to meet you, Aaron, I said. Enjoy the show, I know I will. He gave me a quick, curious look at that, but the house lights dimmed and the scattered conversations quieted. The Helio highlight reel faded to the Helio logo alone, swimming in soft light. A voice came over the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage, CEO and co-founder of Heliobank, Ethan Reyes. My heart tripped, then steadied. I had loved Ethan once with the kind of intensity that makes you stupid. I could admit that now. I'd loved him so much that when he first turned to me in our cramped apartment and said, "We should build a company around your algorithm," I'd heard "we" and translated it to us forever. Ethan walked out onto the stage to enthusiastic applause, looking exactly like a startup success story. Tailored navy suit, no tie, just the right amount of stubble, that easy, media-trained smile. He waved, he settled his hands on the lectern. He nodded as if he were humbled by all this, even as his eyes gleamed. "Thank you," he said. "Thank you all for being here on this incredible night." When we started Heliobank 3 years ago, we had a simple belief. Traditional credit systems were leaving too many people in the dark. I tuned out his opening monologue and let his voice wash over me. I'd heard it all before. I could practically recite his metaphors along with him. We are the flashlight. We are the sunrise. We believe in financial daylight. Once upon a time, those phrases had made me feel proud. Then they started to sound like paper taped over something cracked. I let my mind drift backward, tracing the path from that dorm room conversation to this ballroom stage, rewalking the trail of small betrayals that had led me here, purse full of evidence, phone ready, dress zipped up, like a line drawn under a very long equation. The first time Ethan called me brilliant, we were 19 and staring at a laptop, surrounded by the kind of clutter that only stressed college students can create. Energy drink cans, highlighter-streaked textbooks, sticky notes I'd started using as coasters. I'd stayed up half the night tweaking a prototype of what would eventually become Helio's risk model. It was just a class project then, a curiosity, a what-if scribbled into code form. "I mean it, May," he'd said, leaning over my shoulder, eyes wide. "This model is unreal. You're seeing patterns no one else can see." "It's statistics," I'd replied, trying to sound modest, even though my chest had warmed at his words. "Data in, probabilities out. Not exactly magic." "It is when you do it," he'd insisted, and that was Ethan's gift. He knew how to wrap words around you like a blanket until you forgot to check whether they were actually true. In my family, I'd always been the reliable one, the one who got good grades without making a fuss, the one who remembered dentist appointments and my parents' anniversaries because my older brother Daniel had a talent for misplacing everything, including entire months. At home, my achievements were treated like the minimum viable product of being me. "Of course you did well, you're Maya." Daniel got applause for showing up to class on time. I didn't resent him exactly, but it did something subtle to me over the years, like a plant growing crooked toward the only window. So when Ethan looked at my code and said, "You could be the engine of a real company with this," our company, I believed that "our" with a kind of naive faith I can now only describe as adorable. We spent the next 2 years falling in love and building out the idea that became Heliobank. Well, to be fair, I built more, and he pitched more, but it felt like division of labor, not imbalance. He'd pace while I typed, talking about financial inclusion and disrupting old systems, and I'd nod and ask questions about what kind of digital fingerprints we could collect ethically, what variables might blind the model one way or another. When he suggested we bring in Lila as the third co-founder, I was thrilled. She and I had met in an intro statistics class and bonded over our mutual annoyance at people who said, "I'm just not a math person," like it was a charming personality trait. Lila was the kind of friend who showed up at your door with takeout when you texted, "This day is a trash fire," and who remembered every detail you ever mentioned. Organized, calm, good with people. "I'll be the one who makes sure you two remember to eat and pay taxes," she joked the first time we all sat around a coffee shop table sketching the outline of a company. COO stands for Chief Overwhelmed Overlord, right? It felt right. The three of us against an unfair system, armed with code and ambition. We registered the name Heliobank because Ethan liked the sun metaphor, and I rolled my eyes but secretly loved the way the letters curved. I designed the logo between classes using free software and too much caffeine. I remember the night we pushed the first working prototype live on a sandbox environment, how we'd all crowded around my laptop and watched the model chew through test applicants' data, scoring them faster and more accurately than the clunky legacy systems we'd compared against. "You did it," Ethan whispered in my ear. "We did it," I corrected, because at that point, I still believed that was true. The first big investor to really see us was Marcus Sloan. Silver hair, perfect smile, the calm intensity of someone who's been very rich for a very long time. He visited our drafty little office, listened to Ethan's practiced pitch, asked me 2 or 3 pointed technical questions that told me he understood more than he pretended to, and then leaned back with a thoughtful noise. "There's something here," he said. "You're early, the regulators will need convincing, and the big banks will not like you one bit, which is a good sign. But if we do this, we do it properly. Real board, real governance, real structure." "We want that," Ethan said, glancing at me and Lila. "We want to build something serious." "Good," Marcus replied. "Well, then let's talk about your Series A." I can close my eyes even now and picture the signing day. The conference room in Marcus's sleek office, the pastries artfully arranged on a platter, the stack of legal documents that looked both boring and terrifying. Our own lawyer, recommended by another founder, sat with us and walked us through the slides in broad strokes. "You're all listed as co-founders with vesting schedules," he said, tapping a page. "You've got standard founder stock. Apex gets preferred shares. You'll have a board with 2 investor seats and 1 independent seat. IP assignment here is normal. Everything you've built that relates to the business belongs to the company. That last part made my stomach twist a little. I scanned the dense paragraph. It basically said that any invention, code, algorithm, concept, or scribble on a napkin I'd created in the last 2 years that had anything to do with financial risk modeling now belonged to Heliobank in its entirety. This seems very broad, I said slowly. Our lawyer nodded. It is, but this is standard language. Investors need to know the company fully owns its core technology. But I started working on the algorithm before we even incorporated, I pointed out. In class. On my own time. Ethan reached over and laid his hand over mine, warm and familiar. And then you decided to use it as the basis for our company, he said gently. Helio doesn't exist without it, right? This is just putting what already is into writing. It's all of ours together. Exactly, the lawyer said. Look, if you walk away tomorrow, you still own your shares and your equity. But the company owns the IP. Walk away tomorrow. I never imagined that scenario then. I was all in. Helio was my future. My past work folded into a larger thing, something that might actually make a dent in the world. I signed. We all did, smiling for the photographer Marcus had hired to capture the moment. There's a picture from that day where I'm in the center, holding a pen, Ethan and Lila on either side of me, Marcus looming kindly behind us. I look almost overwhelmed with happiness. Whenever I see that photo now, I want to reach in and shake that girl, tell her to hire a different lawyer, and ask a lot more questions. But nostalgia is not useful when you're planning revenge, so I filed the memory where it belonged and focused on everything that came after. For a while, things felt like a success montage. We moved into a bigger office with actual windows and a real espresso machine that I learned how to operate because nobody else bothered to read the manual. We hired engineers, analysts, a small but fierce compliance team. I became Chief Technology Officer officially, even though I was still doing the work of 3 people, building out the risk engine, integrating it into partner systems, answering questions from potential customers who didn't quite understand what machine learning meant, but knew it sounded impressive. Ethan flew around charming investors and partners. Lila ran operations with terrifying efficiency, making sure contracts got signed and people got paid, and the whole machine didn't shake itself apart. We were a good team, or at least that's how it felt then. Sure, there were late nights and fights about priorities in the general sense that we were sprinting at a cliff, hoping it would turn into a runway before we fell off, but I was proud of what we were building. And then, in the middle of that chaos, Ethan proposed. It was a Tuesday night, nothing special. We were the last ones left in the office, finishing up a deck for a big partner meeting. I was still in the same hoodie I'd worn all day, my hair in a knot, my eyes scratchy. Ethan said, "We need a break," and I agreed, thinking he meant a snack. Instead, he pulled a small box out of his backpack and dropped to one knee right there between my desk and the whiteboard. "Maya," he said, grinning up at me. "This company doesn't exist without you, and neither does the future I want. Will you marry me?" I stared at him, then at the ring. It was simple and beautiful, and somehow the fact that he'd kept it in his backpack next to his laptop made it feel more real. "Are you serious?" I asked, because my brain sometimes lags behind my reality. "I am very serious," he replied. Also slightly sleep-deprived, but still serious. I said yes. Of course I said yes. We kissed and laughed, and promptly knocked over a stack of sticky notes with our enthusiasm. Lila squealed and hugged us both when we told her, and soon the whole team knew. For a while, everything in my life was tangled together in a way that felt comforting instead of dangerous. My fiancé, my best friend, my company, all in the same orbit. The first cracks were hairline thin and easy to ignore. A board meeting I wasn't invited to because they're focusing on sales, it'll bore you. A journalist profile that referred to Ethan as the mastermind behind Helio's groundbreaking risk engine, with only a brief nod to his brilliant technical team. I remember reading that and feeling something unpleasant twist in my stomach. I answered all their questions about the model, I said to Ethan, confused. I walked them through half the architecture. Media people simplify, he said, rubbing his temples. They want a hero. It doesn't mean it's true. Come on, May, you hate being in the spotlight anyway. That part was true. Public speaking made me sweat and stumble. I'd always been happier playing the wizard behind the curtain. Still, it stung, seeing my work translated into someone else's myth. It's our story, I said. I just don't want to disappear from it. You won't, he said, pulling me close. You are Helio's engine. Everyone who matters knows that. Everyone who matters. That turned out to be a more flexible category than I realized. The first time I wasn't invited to a board meeting at all, my calendar still pinged. Board meeting, 1 p.m. I stood up from my desk at 5 minutes to 1, grabbed my notebook and headed toward the conference room, only to see Ethan and Lila already inside with Marcus and a man I didn't recognize, the door half closed. Lila saw me and slipped out quickly, closing the door behind her. Hey, she said, attempting a breezy tone that didn't quite land. You're good to skip this one. Since when do founders skip board meetings? I asked. She winced. Marcus wanted to keep this one tight, more of a financial check-in. It's mostly sales funnels and runway projections. We'll loop you in if anything impacts product. Product, I repeated. The word tasted weird. So what, just the product person now? You're the tech brain, she said. This is business stuff. Seriously, it's going to be 2 hours of customer acquisition cost charts. You'll thank me. I watched her go back inside, watched the door close. Through the glass walls, I could see them all talking animatedly. Ethan gesturing like he did when he was pitching. Marcus leaning back with his arms folded. The new man took notes. My reflection in the glass looked small and oddly transparent. I told myself it was fine. One meeting didn't mean anything. They trusted me to run technology without dragging me into every conversation. It was only later when I saw the board minutes and realized they'd discussed leadership structure and CTO performance concerns without me that I understood what that closed door had really meant. Officially, the concerns surfaced a few weeks later in the form of a quick check-in Lila scheduled on my calendar. She came into my office with her tablet pressed to her chest and a look on her face that said she'd practiced this in front of a mirror. I'm worried about you, she began, sitting down across from me. You've been working nonstop and we've noticed some issues. Issues, I repeated flatly. Like what? She pulled up a report and turned her screen toward me. It listed a handful of incidents in which our risk model had supposedly misclassified borrowers. These defaults, she said, tapping one. They're making Marcus nervous. I skimmed the document. The framing was misleading, to put it politely. These aren't model errors, I said. These are misrepresentations on the applications. I've told you we need better input verification. The model is only as good as the data. I know, she said quickly. I know you've raised those concerns. But from the outside, from the board's point of view, this looks like the tech isn't as solid as we said. So fix the intake process, I shot back. We can't compensate for people lying about their income if we don't have third-party checks. She sighed. I'm on your side, May. I am. But Marcus wants to see us taking action. He thinks you're stretched too thin, that maybe you've been missing things. I have not been missing things, I said, heat creeping into my voice. I am the one pointing out the things everyone else is ignoring. Please don't get defensive, she said, in the voice she used on employees who were about to push back in a way that would complicate her life. We just want to support you. She slid another document in front of me, this one with a title that made my stomach drop. Performance Improvement Plan. We have to formalize expectations, she said. It's standard procedure at this stage. Clear goals, measurable outcomes. I scanned the bullet points, feeling a mix of anger and disbelief. Reduce error rates by 30%. Improve cross-functional communication. Demonstrate consistent ability to meet deadlines. I'd hit every deadline I'd set, and the so-called error rates were edge cases I'd been warning about. But on paper, on a neat HR form, it all looked reasonable. If you do this, Lila said gently, if you show progress over the next quarter, we can go back to the board and say everything's under control. If you don't, Marcus might push for stronger measures. Like what? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Let's not go there, she replied. Sign it, show them what you're capable of, and this will all blow over. I signed. My hand shook a little as I did, and I was suddenly very aware of how quiet my office was. When she left, I sat for a long time staring at the door, then at my own reflection in the dark computer monitor. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a switch flipped. That night, I started backing up my work. At first, it was just my usual version control habits, but more thorough. Local copies of key repositories, snapshots of data schemas, exports of my research notes. Then I started pulling copies of emails where I'd flagged issues that had been ignored, logged board requests, preserved performance reviews from before Marcus started visiting more frequently, the ones that described me as exceptional and indispensable. It felt a little like building a parachute while everyone insisted the plane was fine. The moment that destroyed my ability to pretend everything was salvageable came a few weeks later, and it happened in the hallway. Literally. It was one of those long, late nights that were still more common than not. Most of the staff had gone home. I was debugging an integration issue with a partner bank's ancient systems and had just pushed back from my desk to stretch when I heard voices coming from the kitchen area. Ethan's and Lila's. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop exactly. The floor was quiet and sound carried. I'm telling you, this is the only way to make the deal clean, Ethan was saying. His voice had that tight, stressed edge it got when he was trying to steer someone toward a conclusion. Apex wants stability. They want to see us managing risk, not just on the tech side. She's going to feel betrayed, Lila replied. We wouldn't be here without her. I froze. They were talking about me, obviously. I moved closer to the doorway, staying out of sight, my hand on the frame. She's already burned out, Ethan said. You've seen it. The late nights, the paranoia, the way she freaked out about the last article because it didn't quote her enough. This is us looking out for her. We position it as time off, a reset. The board gets a more traditional CTO to reassure them. My breath caught. A more traditional CTO. I repeated silently. Stanford, MIT, someone with a thicker resume and fewer inconvenient opinions. We can't just remove her, Lila said, sounding horrified. She's a founder. Founders get replaced all the time. Ethan snapped, low and sharp. We give her a nice advisory title, keep her equity. Let Apex bring in their own tech lead. She still wins when we exit. Honestly, she should thank us. There was a pause, then a soft sound from Lila that might have been agreement. And what about, us? She asked. The question hung in the air for a second, while my brain scrambled to process exactly what us meant. Ethan answered before I could finish the thought. Us stays between us until everything's stable, he said. We cannot have relationship drama on top of founder drama, okay? Once the deal is done, we can figure it out. One mess at a time. My first instinct was to tell myself I'd misheard. That us meant something else, that I'd misunderstood the tone. But I'd known Lila for years. I knew what her voice sounded like when she was talking about a new restaurant, or a technical challenge, or a spreadsheet. This was different. I stepped into the hallway before I could talk myself out of it. They were standing by the counter, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. Ethan's hand was resting lightly on Lila's arm, fingers curved around her elbow. It fell away the second he saw me. Hey, he said too brightly. Burning the midnight oil? Apparently I'm burned out, I replied calmly, even though my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. Paranoid even. And also, in case you hadn't noticed, I'm in the hallway. The color drained from Lila's face. May, we were just discussing how to replace me with a more traditional CTO to make Apex comfortable, I said. And whatever us is that you're planning to keep secret while you restructure my life. Ethan straightened, his whole posture shifting into something defensive. You're blowing this out of proportion, he said. We were brainstorming contingency plans. You've been under a lot of stress and do not turn this into concern. I cut in. Do not stand there and act like you are worried about my wellness while you plan to cut me out of the company I built and move in with my best friend. For a moment, nobody spoke. I could see the battle happening on Ethan's face, the split-second calculations. Finally, he sighed and ran a hand through his hair. Look, he said, we haven't handled this perfectly. I'll admit that. But you have to admit things haven't been working lately. You've been antagonistic with the board. You've been insubordinate with Marcus. Insubordinate, I repeated, a little dazed by the word choice. You mean I disagreed with him when he tried to push through shortcuts that would make the model less fair? You were combative, he insisted. There's a difference between raising concerns and accusing our lead investor of not caring about our mission. He doesn't, I said. He cares about his return. We all care about the return, Lila said, and her voice cracked a little. We have employees now, mortgages, people depending on us. We can't afford to be idealistic at the expense of the company. I stared at her. This was the woman who'd once spent an entire night helping me adjust weightings and the fairness constraints because we'd discovered a subtle bias against a particular neighborhood. Idealistic, I echoed. That's what we're calling ethics now? This is exactly what I mean, Ethan said quickly. You make everything personal. You attack people instead of working with them. My laugh came out more like a short, sharp breath. Says the man cheating on his fiancée with her best friend while strategizing how to erase her from the cap table narrative. We are not erasing you from anything, he said, a little too loudly. You would keep all your equity. We want you to stay involved as an advisor. You'd be free to work on other projects. Maybe go back to research. You'd be happier. You don't know what would make me happy, I said. You don't get to decide that for me. We have to decide what's best for the company, Lila whispered. We don't have a choice. Everyone in this building has a choice, I replied. You just made yours. I walked away. I wish I could say I did it with cinematic grace, hair swishing, head high, but the truth is my legs felt weirdly unsteady, and my hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped my phone. I made it back to my office, closed the door, and stood there for a moment with my forehead pressed against the glass. The hurt came first, hot and thick. I had loved Ethan. I had trusted Lila. I had built Helios Core with them, thinking we were all pulling the same way. That kind of layered betrayal is like ripping out a root system. You don't realize how many things are connected until it all tears at once. The rage came second, cooler and sharper. Rage is underrated, I think, at least when it's channeled. It cuts through fog. It makes things suddenly painfully clear. I did not throw anything. I did not scream. I did not march back into the hallway and demand they pack their things and leave, partly because I couldn't, and partly because some quiet part of me was already moving into analysis mode. The board had power. The investors had more. On paper, I was vulnerable. The IP assignment, the PIP, the carefully documented performance concerns, they'd been laying track for months, maybe longer. Emotionally, I wanted to blow everything up. Practically, I knew I needed a plan. I locked my office, sat down at my desk, and opened my laptop. For the next 3 hours, I went through every document, email thread, and policy file I could access. I read board minutes, investor updates, HR correspondence. I traced the arc of how my role had been described over time, from indispensable technical co-founder to challenging stakeholder. I searched for any mention of Apex's conditions for an acquisition or additional investment. There it was in a tidy bullet point in a board deck. As part of any strategic transaction, Apex will require A. Updated leadership structure emphasizing scalable operational excellence. B. Flexibility in key executive roles. C. Clarity of IP ownership and ongoing technical support. I read that 3 times, the words blurring. Flexibility in key executive roles. Translation: we want the right to replace founders, regularly, quietly. I expected to feel defeated. Instead, I mostly felt tired and oddly calm. You don't beat people like this by outshouting them. You beat them by understanding the rules they're trying to twist and then twisting them back. I called Priya the next day. We'd met years ago at a Women in Tech event, back when Helio was just a sketch on a napkin. She'd been a junior associate then, amused and slightly horrified by some of the stories founders told after a few drinks about predatory clauses and standard terms that sounded anything but. We'd kept in touch. "You sound like you swallowed a blender," she said when she picked up and heard my voice. "Tell me everything." I told her. I laid it out as cleanly as I could. The PIP, the closed-door meetings, the hallway conversation, the hinted-at replacement. I told her about the IP assignment, about how much of the core algorithm predated the company's incorporation. When I finished, there was a long silence on the line. "Please tell me you've been backing things up," she said finally. "Of course," I replied. "I'm not reckless, just optimistic, which I now recognize as a dangerous combination." She laughed, but it was a grim sound. "Okay," she said. "Oh, here's the thing. Is the situation gross? Yes. Is it illegal? Not necessarily. Investors can push founders out. Founders can date each other's exes. Ethically questionable, but not against the law. However," she paused and I could almost hear her smile. "If they've misrepresented your role to investors, regulators, or acquirers, if they've falsely attributed work, if they've ignored your documented warnings about risk, that's a different story. And if they're planning an acquisition that undervalues your contribution while using your work as the selling point, well, that gets interesting." "Interesting how?" I asked. "Interesting as in leverage," she said. "You're not going to get them to admit they pushed you out because you were too principled. But you can make very sure that anyone writing a big check understands exactly how much of Helio's value sits inside your brain and hard drive." "Marcus would love that," I muttered. "Marcus will love whatever keeps his deal clean," she said. "Or at least deniable. Look, I don't think you should burn this place down on principle alone. I think you should document everything, understand the acquisition terms, and then decide whether you want to negotiate a better outcome quietly or drop a truth bomb in public." I must have gone silent because she added, "I know you, Maya. You like your bombs well-structured." "I like my probabilities aligned with my goals," I said. "Exactly," she replied. "So let's gather enough information that your revenge, if you choose to take it, also serves your long-term interests." "Who said anything about revenge?" I asked. "You did," she said. "When you called me, you just wrapped it in a lot of rational words." She wasn't wrong. Over the next 2 months, I played the part Ethan and Lila expected from me. Slightly wounded, a little withdrawn, more focused on code than on politics. I went to the meetings they invited me to, skipped the ones they did not, and smiled just enough to keep HR from sending me wellness check-in emails. Meanwhile, I quietly assembled an archive. I pulled together every early draft of the algorithm from before Helio existed as a company, complete with class project timestamps, professor feedback, and Git logs. I organized email chains where Ethan had pitched Helio to early investors using phrases like Maya's risk engine and her groundbreaking model. I saved the article where he'd half complained that journalists kept saying it was his algorithm when it's really Maya's, but she hates interviews. I collected every internal message in which I'd flagged concerns about input data quality and fairness, along with the gently dismissive responses. A few of those responses were from Apex advisors pushing us to accept a certain level of imperfection in pursuit of speed, which Priya found especially interesting. When she asked, I also started keeping a low-key log of the financial projections I saw, the numbers used in internal board decks versus the more optimistic ones in external fundraising materials. There were differences. Not huge, but enough that, if taken out of context, might look like they were shading reality in a friendlier light. "I'm not saying they are committing fraud," Priya said carefully. "But I am saying that regulators get very twitchy when risk models are represented as more tested than they are, especially if those models are being used to decide who gets loans." "So your advice is to just keep gathering evidence?" I asked. "For now," she said. "We don't know when Apex is going to announce anything publicly. Once they do, you have a very short window before the narrative sets in concrete. People will believe whatever story they hear first." My opportunity came faster than either of us expected. One Monday morning, about 6 weeks after the hallway incident, Ethan called an all-hands meeting. We have some exciting news, he said, and his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. We've entered into serious discussions with Apex about a strategic acquisition. Nothing is finalized yet, so do not go tweeting this, but we're optimistic. The room buzzed. A few people clapped. Others exchanged wary glances. Acquisitions could mean great things or terrible ones, sometimes both. I kept my face neutral and my hands folded in my lap. Later that day, Lila asked if we could talk. She closed my office door behind her. We want to make sure you're taken care of in this transition, she began, and I had to admire her ability to sound almost sincere. Of course, you'll keep your founder equity, and Apex is prepared to offer you a very generous advisory package. You'd be free to pursue your own research again, without the stress of day-to-day operations. How much? I asked. She blinked. The advisory compensation? Yes, I said. If you're going to try to pay me to disappear, I'd like to know the rate. A flicker of something, guilt maybe, crossed her face. It's still being finalized, she hedged. But there would be a lump sum at closing, plus a retainer for the first year if you're available for consultations. Priya and I had anticipated something like this. I'll need to see it in writing, I said. And I'd like to review the acquisition agreement. That's for the board, she said. Founders or stakeholders, I replied. And I'm still the CTO as of right now. If Apex is buying Helios technology, they're buying my work. I want to be very sure they understand exactly what they're paying for. She hesitated. We can share a summarized version, she said finally. We have to keep some details confidential. I'm sure Apex Legal will be thrilled to hear you're withholding material information from an executive officer, I said mildly. It was a guess, but your average large acquirer does not enjoy surprises involving annoyed founders with evidence. Lila's jaw tightened. This doesn't have to be adversarial, May. Then don't make it adversarial, I said. Be transparent. 2 days later, I received a high-level overview document that was clearly designed to look friendly while containing as few specifics as possible. Fortunately, Priya was very good at reading between lines. We spent a Saturday in her kitchen going through it, both of us in sweatpants, her whiteboard covered in scribbles. Okay, she said, circling a paragraph. Here. Apex acknowledges the importance of Helios' proprietary risk engine and expects ongoing support from key personnel as designated by the combined leadership team. That's vague on purpose. They're leaving the door open to reshuffling people, I said. Exactly, she replied. Now look at this part. Full and unencumbered ownership of all intellectual property, including all improvements, derivatives, and associated know-how, will transfer to Apex at closing. Know-how, I repeated. As in, what's in my head. As in, they want you to sign away not just your code, but your ability to use your own ideas elsewhere in certain ways, she said. At least for a period of time. We need to see the full language on that before you agree to anything. I thought of Ethan and Lila, sitting in some gleaming conference room, positioning my exit as a generous gesture. I thought of Marcus, watching the numbers and anticipating his return. If I walked quietly, they'd all get exactly what they wanted. They'd tell the world a neat story. Visionary team, small bumps in the road, strategic acquisition, happily ever after. I'd be a footnote, a name mentioned in the early chapters and then left behind. I realized then what I wanted most. It wasn't to stop the acquisition altogether. Helio in some form deserved to exist. People needed fair evaluations. And there were employees who'd poured years into this, thinking they were building something good. I didn't want to tear down their work to hurt a few people at the top. What I wanted was acknowledgement. Truth. I wanted Ethan and Lila and Marcus to feel, publicly and undeniably, the discomfort they'd tried so hard to hide under polished narratives. I wanted the story corrected while everyone was watching. They're planning the announcement at that FinTech conference next month? I told Priya, tapping the overview where it mentioned major industry event. A big dramatic reveal. Splashy video, live-streamed keynote. Then that's your stage too, she said. What exactly are you thinking? I took a deep breath. I'm thinking we let them walk all the way up to the podium with their pretty story, I said. And then we show the world the parts they left out. The plan came together in pieces. Priya helped me understand exactly which parts would be safe and effective to mention publicly without stepping over any legal lines. You can absolutely talk about your own experience, she said. You can show early drafts of your work as long as you don't reveal proprietary code. You can quote articles and investor emails that mention your role. You can talk about the differences between what was promised and what was delivered in terms of fairness. What about Apex? I asked. They're the ones writing the big check. If they feel blindsided, then they go back to the negotiation table, very motivated to fix the problem, she replied. Look, big institutions hate mess more than they hate anything else. If you present them with a mess they didn't know they were buying into, they'll want to clean it up fast. By throwing me under the bus, I said. Maybe, she acknowledged, or by overcorrecting, bringing you back into the narrative as the genius who must be kept happy. Maybe even offering you a role in the combined company that they trust more than the current leadership. You don't have to accept it, but the option is power. Power. It had felt so far away lately, like something happening in rooms I couldn't enter. The idea of pulling some of that power back, even briefly, lit up a part of my brain that had been dim for too long. Over the weeks leading up to the conference, I refined the presentation I would give, even though I wasn't on any official program. It wasn't a speech exactly, more like a statement backed by receipts. I put together a clean, simple slide deck. No proprietary code, just timelines and quotes. A slide showing my college project dated before Helios incorporation, with a professor's comment about its potential. Screenshots of early emails where Ethan had introduced me to people as the brains behind Helios' secret sauce. A graph comparing our internal fairness metrics to the rosier figures touted in public pitches. Carefully redacted, but clear enough to make a point. I uploaded a version of the deck to a secure folder with a scheduled release trigger Priya helped me configure. At a specific time, it would send itself to a curated list of journalists, regulators, and Apex contacts she'd gathered from public directories and her network. Are you sure about the timing? She asked as we finalized it. If you release during the keynote, things are going to get very chaotic very fast. That's the idea, I said. They do love a live reaction. And that was how I found myself back at the conference hotel, in my engagement dress, watching Ethan give his polished, slightly sanitized version of the Helio origin story. And we knew, he was saying, that if we could build a system that saw people more clearly, we could expand access to credit in a way that was not only profitable but fair. He paused for effect, then smiled. Tonight, I'm thrilled to announce that with Apex's support, we'll be taking that vision even further. The audience applauded. A graphic appeared on the screen behind him. Helios' logo and Apex's, sliding together with a little chime. I glanced down at my phone. 2 minutes to go. What began as a scrappy idea, Ethan continued, has become a platform used by institutions across the country. None of this would have been possible without our incredible team and the early believers who saw our potential. My chest tightened. I remembered the first time he'd said something like that on stage. How proud I'd been, even though he hadn't mentioned me by name. I told myself it didn't matter. The work mattered. Impact mattered. Names were just labels. I knew better now. Names are how history gets written. If you're not in the story, you might as well not have been there at all. My phone vibrated. 8 p.m. on the dot. The automation kicked in. Somewhere in the invisible guts of the internet, a flurry of emails went out, each with a calm subject line. Context on Heliobank's origin and risk model fairness questions, from my personal address. I knew most people wouldn't see it immediately. They were watching Ethan on stage or following the live stream. But a few journalists in the room had their phone alerts on. One in particular, a writer named Jenna from a tech outlet that liked complicated stories, had promised to keep an eye out. The first sign that the wave had hit came about 30 seconds later, when 2 reporters in the front row glanced at their phones and then at each other. One of them raised his hand, already half standing. Ethan was about to segue into thanking Apex when he saw the raised hand and, because he loved looking open and accessible, nodded. "We'll have time for questions after the remarks," he said. "But go ahead, we can take one now." The reporter stood. His badge identified him as being from a financial news network that loved anything that hinted at controversy. "Yes," he said. "I just received a message with some additional context about Helio's origins and risk model. It raises questions about how fairly your algorithm has been represented to investors and regulators. It also says that the core model predates Helio's founding and was developed solely by someone who is no longer with the company. Can you comment on that?" If the ballroom had been buzzing before, now it crackled. Heads turned. People murmured. On stage, Ethan blinked. For the first time in a long while, he looked genuinely off balance. "I'm not sure what you're referring to," he said, buying time. "Helio's algorithm is the product of an entire team." "He means this," said another voice, clear and calm, coming from the back of the room. "Mine." I stood up. Every head within 6 rows turned toward me. Those farther away followed the ripple. Ethan's eyes found mine across the distance, widening. For a second, we just looked at each other. The past and present stacked like transparencies. "Hi," I said, projecting just enough that the nearby mic on a stand caught my voice. "I'm the someone in question. My name is Maya Ortiz. I built the original version of Helio's risk model before Helio existed. I was also the company's first CTO." It was quiet the way rooms go quiet when something very interesting might be about to happen. Even the servers near the walls paused. Ethan recovered fast. "Maya," he said, forcing a smile. "It's great to see you here." "Everyone, Maya was one of our early team members who... Co-founders are more than early team members," I said. "So are fiancés, but I'm not here to talk about that." A little ripple of stunned laughter moved through the crowd. If I was going to do this, I might as well be honest about the full set of betrayals, even if the romantic part wasn't what would interest regulators. I am here because for the past year, Helio has been rewriting its own origin story in ways that erase my contribution and downplay serious concerns I raised about how the model was being represented. "That's a very loaded statement," Ethan said, and I could see the calculation behind his eyes going into overdrive. His PR training was probably screaming at him to keep calm. This isn't really the time or place for internal disagreements. You made it the time and place when you framed Helio as something it isn't, I replied. Can you answer the question the reporter asked? Did you or did you not know that the original algorithm predates the company and that I developed it independently? And did you disclose that clearly to Apex during acquisition talks? Movement at the side of the room caught my eye. A group of people in suits were huddled near the exit, one of whom I recognized from the conference brochure as an Apex executive. He was looking at his phone, then at the stage, then at me. Helio fully owns its IP, Ethan said. All of Maya's work was properly assigned to the company when it was formed, and she has been compensated accordingly with founder equity. He looked almost triumphant, like he'd just closed a loophole. This was exactly why Priya had drilled me on the wording. Legally assigned, I agreed. But ethically, it's misleading to present the story as if the model was your invention, or as if Helio's success is purely the result of the current leadership team's genius. Investors and regulators care about who understands the core technology. They also care if internal concerns about unfair outcomes or data quality have been ignored. I saw the Apex executive stiffen slightly at the word regulators. Maya, Ethan said, and now his voice had a warning edge. We can handle this offline. You're clearly upset, but this is an important night for a lot of people. You're right, I said. It is. It's an important night for the people who trusted Helio to evaluate them fairly. It's an important night for Apex, who is about to acquire a company while missing some key context. It's an important night for your employees, who deserve to know that the mission they signed up for is being honored, not compromised. A third reporter stood up. You mentioned ignored concerns, she said. Are you saying Helio's algorithm is biased or unsafe? I'm saying the algorithm was designed with fairness constraints that only work if the input data is honest and complete, I replied. I raised repeated concerns internally that the data we were getting from some partners was incomplete, and that we were presenting performance numbers externally that assumed ideal data. Those concerns were dismissed as being too idealistic. I heard Lila suck in a breath on stage where she sat slightly behind Ethan, near Marcus, who had joined them for the big moment. Marcus's face had gone very still, like a carved mask. That's a serious accusation, he said, taking the mic for the first time. Data quality is an ongoing challenge in our industry, and we have robust processes to. With respect, I cut in, robust processes document concerns. They don't bury them. I glanced at the reporters. You all have my email now. It includes redacted internal messages and a timeline. I'm not here to tank the acquisition. I'm here to make sure it happens with eyes open. A hand went up from the Apex section. To his credit, the executive I'd noticed earlier stepped forward and didn't wait for Ethan to call on him. If I may, he said, taking the aisle mic from its stand. I'm Alan Kim, head of strategic initiatives at Apex. Ms. Ortiz, we were told you left Helio for personal reasons and that you supported this transaction. I support Helio's mission, I said. I do not support being erased from its history or having my work used as window dressing while decisions are made that compromise fairness. He nodded slowly. Did anyone from Helio's current leadership team ever ask you to review or sign off on the fairness numbers presented in the acquisition materials? No, I said. In fact, I was excluded from several key meetings and then offered a generous advisory package to quietly step back. Over by the stage, Lila looked like she wanted to sink through the floor. Ethan had gone pale. Marcus, however, was watching with the wary look of a man who had just realized his tidy deal might have hidden clauses. We're very proud of our partnership with Helio, Alan said carefully. And we take these questions seriously. We will be reviewing the materials in light of this new information. Oh, he turned to Ethan. In the meantime, I think it would be appropriate to acknowledge Ms. Ortiz's role more clearly. Ethan forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. Of course, he said. Maya was integral to Helio's early days. We're grateful for her contributions. Early days, I repeated. It's interesting how quickly the early days turn into someone else's story. I knew I had to stop soon. There's a fine line between telling the truth and looking unhinged, and I did not intend to cross it here. I hadn't come to rant. I'd come to redirect. So I took a breath, felt the eyes on me, and chose my last words carefully. Look, I said, I don't want Helio to fail. I want Helio to live up to what we claimed it was. A system that makes lending more fair, not just more profitable. If Apex is serious about that, they'll make sure the people who built the core and who care about its ethical implications are at the table when they decide where to take it next. Not just the ones who look good in pitch decks. I let that hang in the air, then added more quietly. And maybe, next time you tell the story of how it all started, you'll remember to include the woman who wrote the first line of code. I sat down. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the room exploded into noise. Reporters shouted questions. People typed furiously on their phones. I saw a few of the younger Helio engineers looking at me with wide, startled eyes, like they'd just realized the wizard behind the curtain had been there the whole time. On stage, Ethan tried to regain control, but every answer he gave spawned more questions. The live stream chat, as I'd later see, went wild. Priya texted me. You timed that perfectly. Also, please leave before someone tries to usher you into a quiet room. She wasn't wrong. When systems get shaken, people like to contain the shaking. I stood up, smoothed my dress, and made my way toward the exit. Aaron, the analyst who'd shared his desserts earlier, caught my arm gently as I passed. That was something, he said, a little awed. You just changed the entire risk profile of this deal in 10 minutes. I'm good with risk profiles, I said. It's sort of my thing. If you ever start another company, he said impulsively, call me. I'd like to be on the right side of the origin story next time. I smiled. I'll keep that in mind. Outside in the foyer, the noise from the ballroom faded behind me. My phone buzzed nonstop with messages from unknown numbers, from journalists asking for more detail, from old colleagues sending shocked emojis, from my brother who had apparently been watching the live stream and texted simply, I always knew you were terrifying in the best way, Priya called. They're scrambling, she said without preamble. I just got a heads up that Apex has put a temporary hold on signing until they conduct an internal review. Marcus is furious. Ethan tried to claim you're an unstable ex. It did not land the way he hoped in a room full of people who just saw you present calmly with documentation. I leaned against a pillar, letting that wash over me. So what happens now? I asked. Now, she said, Apex will probably reach out. They may want you to consult on the review. They may offer you a role in the combined entity. Or they might just offer you a better advisory and non-disparagement package to get you to stop talking. Whatever they do, you're negotiating from a very different position. And Helio? I asked quietly. If they fix the issues you flagged and acknowledge your work, they'll probably survive this, she said. Investors have short memories when returns are good. But Ethan and Lila's reputations are going to take a hit. Word gets around. People remember who tried to erase whom. I thought of the hallway conversation, of the way Ethan had said dead weight like it was just a reasonable descriptor, of the way Lila had insisted they had no choice, all while making choices that hurt me in the most personal ways possible. Good, I said simply. That night, back in my apartment, a new one without any of Ethan's furniture or lingering cologne, I kicked off my heels, hung up the engagement dress, and sat cross-legged on the couch with my laptop. Articles were already going up. Founding CTO challenges Helio Bank origin story during acquisition announcement. Questions raised about fairness claims of Helio's risk engine. The headlines were slightly dramatic, but the pieces were surprisingly balanced. Many of them quoted from the email I'd sent out and included my carefully worded explanations. Some included old photos from Helio's early days. Me at a whiteboard, grinning, marker in hand. It was strange seeing my own face in those thumbnails. Part of me wanted to crawl under a blanket and hide. Another part felt for the first time in a long while like the world had rotated back onto a more honest axis. My inbox pinged with a message from an Apex email address. Subject, request for conversation. I forwarded it to Priya. She replied with a thumbs up emoji and, a minute later, call you in the morning. For now, enjoy this. You earned it. I closed my laptop and stared at the ceiling for a while, listening to the quiet. Revenge fantasies always focus on the moment of impact. The gasp, the shock, the glorious toppling of the person who hurt you. What they don't show you is the weird stillness afterward, when the adrenaline fades and you're just a person in sweatpants trying to decide whether to order dinner or eat cereal. I did end up talking to Apex with Priya on the line. They offered me various things: a formal consulting role, a larger advisory payout, the chance to lead an internal ethics review if I wanted it. I said I'd think about it, and I did. Ultimately, I turned down the full-time role. They were still the kind of institution that made my teeth itch. But I did agree to consult on the fairness audit, on my terms, with clear boundaries about what they could and could not expect from me. I also negotiated a clause ensuring that any public description of Helio's origins in Apex materials would list me as a co-founder and original architect of the risk model. It seemed like a small thing to some people. It did not feel small to me. As for Ethan and Lila, they stayed on at Helio, but their standing changed. Behind the scenes, I heard from former colleagues that the board pushed Ethan into a more constrained role, eventually making way for a seasoned executive brought in by Apex. Lila stayed in operations but no longer had the same unquestioned authority. It turned out that other people had noticed things about their choices. My speaking up had given those observations a frame. Our last direct communication came in the form of an email from Ethan a few weeks after the conference. It was short. Maya, I wish you hadn't done it like that. We all could have come out ahead without the spectacle. Whatever else has happened, I did love you. I hope someday you find a way to let go. Hey, I stared at it for a long time, then hit delete. I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say to a man who thought the worst part of what I'd done was that it had been public, not that his own behavior had made it necessary. Betrayal is not a single act, it's a pattern. And sometimes the only way to break a pattern is to hold up a mirror in the brightest light you can find. Months passed. The media moved on to the next shiny drama. Helio quietly adjusted its messaging. A few think pieces about fairness in machine learning cited me as a cautionary tale of what happens when companies sideline their most principled technical voices. I started sleeping better. I started coding again, not for someone else's pitch deck, but for myself. Small projects at first, then larger ones. ideas about transparency tools, about helping regular people understand how algorithms evaluate them. One evening, as I sat at my kitchen table sketching out the architecture for a new project, my phone buzzed with a text from my brother. Saw someone complaining online that some founder lady made their favorite fintech bros uncomfortable at a conference last year. He followed it with a clapping emoji and, because my little sister is a legend. I laughed out loud. Legend felt like a stretch. I was a stubborn woman who refused to quietly accept being written out of her own story. But maybe in a world where so many people stayed silent, even that counted for something. If there was one thing I'd learned through all of it, it was this. Revenge done right is not about destroying someone else's life. It's about reclaiming your own. They had tried to take my work, my voice, my narrative, and fold it neatly into their story, like I was just a supporting character who could be written out when convenient. I had taken it back in the most public, undeniable way I could manage, without burning everything down around me. The hurt had not vanished. Betrayal leaves marks. But the anger had cooled into something steadier. Resolve. The next time I walked into a room to sign anything, I would read every line twice. The next time someone called me brilliant, I would ask what they wanted in return. And the next time I built something powerful, I would make sure the story we told about it was one I'd be proud to see on a screen. Even years later, even if I was sitting in the very back of the room in a blue dress watching,